In this episode of Representation Matters, I interviewed Mark Ritson. He's a professor of marketing, an outspoken author, columnist, and the man behind the Marketing Week Mini MBA, which is, one of the de facto best qualifications you can do in our industry. He probably needs no introduction, but it was fantastic to talk to him about why representation and inclusion has been something that's been on his mind for decades, and actually with some surprising stories of maybe why that started. And also talking to him about just how important it is to drive this right across the marketing process, which is really a central theme of the book itself. I start all my interviews more or less the same way by asking talk about why we think representation inclusion probably matters in marketing, whether it's based on kind of your personal experience or your business experience. Where do you stand on that? Do you think this topic matters? Where does inclusion matter in our marketing?
Yeah, it matters on a couple of levels, Jerry, I think. And I think I get more credit than most, I think anyway, because I'm not politically correct, if I can use that word. Do you know what I mean? I care about obviously not hurting anyone's feelings, but I don't believe I posture. Do you know what I mean? But on this topic, yeah. I do think it's super important we take it seriously in marketing. And there's a couple of reasons. First, there's an indirect and a direct reason for me. The direct reason is it's just bad business not to represent the consumers that are out there in the marketing that we're hopefully building around them. It's just bad business not to reflect those people in an appropriate manner, right? So clearly, if I did a lot of work, this will surprise you, Jerry. I did a lot of work with the gay subcultures of the 1990s.
Interesting.
It had a big effect on me. So I did my PhD in in qualitative ethnographic research into brands and advertising. And when I first got to America, I got an opportunity to get research grants. And my biggest passion was to study how gay subcultures both gay and lesbian subcultures took brand names, and we're talking mid-90s, like Haagen-Dazs, and turned it into Fag and Dyke. And Nike became Dikey. And they sold these T-shirts. So I went to about 4 or 5 different gay pride marches in I think it was 95 maybe, and essentially photographed the people that created the T-shirts and talked to them about why. Why is this T-shirt popular? It's just a Fag and Dyke version of Haagen-Dazs. Why are people buying a Dikey T-shirt in the shape of Nike? And everybody told me essentially the same story, which is we are not represented in the mainstream advertising brand narrative, and yet we buy their products. So fuck them. We're going to create our own version of them I wasn't interested in the gay representative, diversity point back then. I was interested in why you messing with brand identity. But I spoke to so many well-spoken artists.
Stumbled upon that insight along the way.
Stumbled upon gay culture at the same time in very interesting places. And as an aside, it was one of the big changing points in my life, because in New York Gay Pride, I got a hit on. I was quite fit when I was younger, Jerry. You won't believe that now, but I was quite fit. It's 15 years.
No comment, Mark.
It's 15 years since a gay man's hit on me, but back then it happened, and it was quite interesting to understand what it was like to be. Several times I felt quite vulnerable that week, because the bears, the big giant gay men in the leather jacket, and I'm sure they weren't meaning to be like that. But it's good for, I'm 6'2" and all of that, but I was outnumbered, outsized by 7 or 8 giant men who could do what they want with me. One of them grabbed my cock, and one of them grabbed my tit, and they're already messing around. But it's very good for straight white men who don't know what it's like to feel suddenly surrounded by much bigger, more powerful people in a different culture. I just thought that was such an important moment. Nothing to do with the thing. Anyway.
A slightly strange reversal, isn't it? So I guess that's unfortunately what some people feel like in normal culture, like, women and smaller people in day-to-day life. Yeah, you kind of choose on the other foot, and you're like,
And one of the things of white privilege, which I do think exists, is we just don't appreciate on a Saturday night walking home that no one is 100% safe, but our vulnerabilities are almost zero compared to other people in the community for various different reasons. So, anyway, the gay pride research really brought home to me the first point, which is if you're going to target consumers, you have to explicitly represent them, or they get pissed
Yeah.
off and they don't want to buy from you. There's another so that's the first reason. The second reason, which is almost more important, is the indirect impact of advertising on stereotypes is incredibly pernicious. So I grew
Yeah.
up again, when I was doing my PhD. My PhD tutor was almost a complete Marxist. I was going to say a slight Marxist, but he's a total Marxist. Richard Elliott, and he made me read all kinds of stuff, Saussure and Heidegger, and also Judith Williamson, who was one of the great early advertising critics of the 80s.
Yeah.
And what Williamson pointed out brilliantly was that when an advert shows, let's say, a woman choosing one cleaning powder over another, consumers have a filter up that says, I know this is an ad. I know you're trying to convince me brand A is better than brand B. So therefore, I will use my perceptual resources to screen that out. But like a
Yeah.
Trojan horse, while you're screening out brand A is better than brand B, the representation of the woman doing the cleaning and the complete absence of a man seeps into your
Just flies in,
perception
yeah.
of sex roles and gender roles and everything else. So I think that those are the two reasons for me why representation is so important. A, because it's good business sense, and B, I think advertising's impact on reinforcing stereotypes is so Trojan horse like. We have to be very careful with it.
I think it's great examples, even like down to very basic stereotypes around gender roles and that kind of thing. I guess the challenge of advertising, isn't it? It's ultimately, certainly historically, you're creating one ad. You're trying to appeal to as many people as possible. You might want to include different communities, different parts of society, but there's a worry in many marketers' heads that in doing so you exclude others. And stereotypes, although they're very damaging, are kind of shortcuts when you've only got a few seconds, especially in communications. I know marketing is much bigger, but in communications, when you've only got a short period of time, how do you think marketers walk that kind of tightrope of not resorting to only showing average people when there's only so many people they can and will show?
Look, I think we're probably the only profession that should be pretty good at this. I think
it's kind of our jobs.
It's kind of our job, right? To first of all be able to segment the market and then represent the different shards of the market appropriately. I think we can go wrong. So I think we can, first of all, in the classic sense, we can just show the stereotypical traditional nuclear straight white family. That's clearly a mistake because the world doesn't look like that anymore. We can also go too far the other way, and we can kind of overstate diversity, which is a grand thing to do, but at the same time can often stop the market from identifying. And we have to be clear that that's another issue, right? If we keep showing, hypothetically, just gay consumers, we're doing a great job of portraying and legitimizing gay identity, which is marvelous. But we may not be doing a great job of inspiring some straight consumers who aren't homophobic. They just don't see themselves there. You know what I mean?
I mean, even as a gay man, I'd find it pretty odd if suddenly every single advert I saw only showed gay LGBT people. I'd be like, what's
it
happening?
Would be odd, wouldn't it? It would be odd.
Yeah.
So but I think there's a couple of examples where brands have gone so far. There's another mistake I think Coke made at Christmas where they just try and find. I mean, there's a big demand now. If you look at a sort of there's a certain kind of family which is sort of made up of every ethnicity and is kind of an amalgam of it all. As good as that is, I don't think that answers the challenge either because no one really recognizes that family. You know what I mean? There's no African American families.
Yeah, a few people have said that. It's kind of obviously those mixed race and things families do exist, but often you're sort of ending up with this weird amalgam, which, as you say, doesn't truly reflect the culture or the reality or what's interesting about the people you're trying to present. Yeah,
absolutely right. So I think the answer comes back to good old-fashioned segmentation. You can't represent everyone, as you've said. I think you've just got to be nuanced enough to be able to say, right, we can have there's nothing better, I think, than having a gay couple as one of the 4 or 5 executions.
Yeah.
And crucially, we don't make a big deal about it. Look, here's the gays. The gays are here. They're all look over here. The legitimization of having a gay couple next to the different strands of the market we want to show and just move on, I think is the way to do it. And obviously, we can't have everyone every time. But I think marketers in each case should be able to say, this is who our market is, and therefore we can cover the spectrum appropriately.
Yeah. I think you talk about a really key point there, which is I think some of the best work in this space is quite subtle. It isn't pointing big fingers at different communities. It's just they're there, they exist, they're part of the fabric of life, and therefore they're in our adverts. But I guess that the other extreme of that is sort of this modern trend for sort of this more purpose-based marketing and sort of brands truly wanting to kind of put their hands up and stand for something. I mean, that could mean supporting kind of LGBT pride, or obviously can be taken to sort of all sorts of interesting extremes by brands. I think you've been fairly outspoken on marketers at times getting too obsessed by that, but also spoken about examples like Dove, I think, which have used it really effectively. How do marketers know when it's kind of right to go into that kind of that next level space?
Well, there's a big question, and it's a strategic question, which is, do I want to position my brand on purpose or using purpose? Yeah. And where I get angry is we either have people who just dismiss purpose completely as always bullshit, or more commonly people that say without purpose your brand will not succeed and you will lose out in the 21st century. Both of which points of view are horseshit, clearly, right? So purpose is a strategic,
somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and brands have to make the choice. Should we position around? And by the way, a brand cannot be purpose-driven and not position on it, right? As well. But do I want to position on a more purposeful, impactful presentation to the consumer or not? And if you don't, it doesn't mean you're an evil, fascist brand. It means you've made the right choice, and you could still be walking the walk. I used the example in my column of Pret a Manger, who for years have given away their sandwiches to the homeless shelters without making a big deal about it. They don't position on that. They don't talk much about it because it's not that useful from a marketing point of view, but they still do the right thing. But they've opted to position on organic and fresh, not on, we feed the homeless in the evenings. And I think that's absolutely legitimate. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan. I mean, again, Black Lives Matter for me was a very important moment, but a really shitty moment for marketing because I just thought every brand blacking out their logo was pathetic. And the problem with that is when they do that, that's tokenism. And it allows them to get out of the fact that they're not doing anything more significant. And I wrote an article about it where I went through all the companies that had blacked out their logos. And it's like Black Lives Matter. Look, we've blacked everything out. 0 people of color at the executive level, right?
Yeah.
So if Black Lives Matter, never mind fucking around with your logo, hire someone of color into your senior management team because many of you are sportswear brands. How the fuck do you get this far into the 21st century with an executive board team that looks like, an Austrian country club? Do you know what I mean? It's bizarre. But but look, we've blacked out our logo here. So I think that tokenism we have to be careful of. But my approach to purpose is I'm not a huge fan of it. A lot of the time I think it's bollocks. But there are times, as you say, with Dove, for example, where it's been done brilliantly and appropriately and successfully.
I think I've always seen it can be quite a good creative North Star for like a brand that would Dove could otherwise be just quite samey to some of the other brands it tries to talk to. It kind of helps it differentiate a bit. And the Pret example is almost an example of kind of purpose as defense. Like they don't make a big deal about it, but if they were challenged about, what do you do with all your food, or what, that can come up, and the fact that they've got a really strong answer there is helpful. In the guide that we worked on with the WFA, it's similar to your own sort of mini MBA, in that it kind of basically breaks down the marketing process. Our guide is a bit more focused on the creative process, but and you've been talking about it, things like market orientation, segmentation, targeting, positioning. But I guess our challenge in our guide, and I guess in all those processes, that we bring with us a lot of biased. Like we know we know what we do, and we know how we consume and how we think, and it's quite hard to get out of that. So as marketers go through that process, what's your advice to marketers? In terms of positioning and thinking about consumers, but getting outside of our crazy little bubbles.
Yeah, and as you know, I mean, this is where diversity and inclusion aligns very nicely with marketing. So,
Yeah,
at the heart of marketing, if you're well trained in marketing, we have market orientation, which is the idea. It's the starting point for all marketing, which is you are not the consumer. Um,
yeah,
you are not the other. So you have to recognize that, and that's when I train marketers, that's where we start. Is your opinion is worthless. It's actually dangerous. What you have to do is get rid of that, and then we can turn to research to understand the point of view of the real market in its full diversity. Um, when you see marketing that way, then the answer to your challenge is really straightforward, which is a good, well-trained marketer should drop their own preconceptions and biases as part of the marketing process because they've been trained not to have their own perspective, but to allow the data and the market to dictate
yeah.
how they see the world. Now, that all sounds great. The reality is, you could put a number on it. Well, I would say significantly less than 5% of marketers are properly trained to a level where they not only understand market orientation but can apply it in their approaches. So, in theory, we should be good at this. In practice, our own opinions and perspectives infiltrate our decisions, and that's again, it's bad marketing practice, and it's also bad from the point of view of diversity, where our own biases get in the way.
Which it kind of brings it back to the kind of point we've landed on a few times, which is that inclusive marketing is really just good marketing because it is our job to understand our consumers. And you hint that definitely that becomes a lot easier when we have more diverse people in our teams around the room. How important do you think it is that we improve the kind of diversity of our industry itself? And I guess as marketers, we should be better at doing that. How do we get more people from different backgrounds into our industry?
I think it's starting to happen. I mean, the only
Yeah,
place where I'm not a beneficiary of the lottery of life is in being a very, very working class person. So there was a time where I think I come from the worst school in England at the moment in the league tables, right? It's the worst secondary school by a very long way in the UK league tables. I come from a proper
Well,
povo.
there was a stat I saw today that something like only 12% of people working in creative industries come from what you might call working class background. So
That's,
it's almost
that's what I
it's
was
one of
going
the
to say,
last
Jerry.
taboos that we don't talk about class, but there's a massive barrier in our industry. Yeah,
No, no, for sure, and that's what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean, I think in the advertising industry, it's private school remains massively dominant. And look, I don't, I think I've grown up now with a lot of people from almost everyone that went to private school, and they're lovely people. But I have felt that sense.
I took a gay box, but other than that, I'm very middle class, private school, a huge amount of privilege. I don't question that for a moment. Yeah,
But again, it's useful, Jerry, because you get a taste of, oh shit, I didn't go to a posh school, and I don't know what any of that, I have no idea what that means, and so I think, yeah, I saw the absence of people of my background at a certain level in the marketing and creative industries. And also the amazement when I occasionally met someone else from a shit ass background who discovered I was from a shit ass background was quite touching. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Younger marketers. I met a girl from my hometown who's 20 years younger than me who refused to believe I went to the same school that she went to. So it's not fucking possible. I'm like, no. So yeah, that's the one little shard I've experienced.
Yeah.
Clearly, when you look at marketing departments and advertising agencies, they don't look like the markets we serve, and to some degree, we do have to fix that too. I think there's a couple of significant problems. The main one is I have to say is gender diversity. If I could highlight
Yeah.
one, it's clear that at the ground level of most marketing departments and advertising agencies, it's predominantly female. And it's equally clear that when we get to the top, those women are almost gone completely,
Flips in the
right?
other direction. Yeah.
And that has to be something that we must focus upon. Now, I'm not saying that we also need to ignore the other elements of inclusivity there, but it's just so incredibly obvious in almost
Yeah.
every company that the marketing's bit is predominantly female at the entry level and is demonstrably male at the top,
Yeah.
and that doesn't seem to be changing that much. I don't know, but that's the one that I think is so obvious. I think we're doing better on racial diversity. I think it's getting better. I don't know. I mean, it's a harder one when you speak to gay or lesbian subcultures. Is it? You tell me. Do you think it's better now than it was a decade ago? It seems to be, but I don't really know, right? I mean,
It's hard. It's hard. I mean, I personally haven't really experienced anything hugely challenging in my career. I've been, like I said, I carry a lot of other privilege with me. I'm a big, tall, white man, and that covers a lot of things. I
yeah,
think we did the WFA did a census quite recently, and it definitely showed that, for instance, amongst minority communities, LGBT, but also ethnic minority, etc. Even though physical presence is improving, there are still like worryingly high percentages of people who are thinking of leaving the industry. So it's a sort of slightly similar story to with women, where we are getting more people through the door,
yeah,
but for whatever reason, people are thinking like, I don't belong here, I'm not valued here, I need to change to be here, whatever. So important to unpack why people are leaving or choosing to leave, and try and break some of
yeah,
those barriers down potentially. And actually, a key theme that's come up throughout all of this is that there's no reason why like a straight middle class white male can't do fantastic inclusive marketing. They just need to be willing to think outside that bubble, to hear different opinions, to do the research, etc. Have to have empathy. So it's not that we're saying that those people can't do fantastic jobs. It's just we'd like to have an industry where you have different perspectives as well, I
yeah.
guess.
I agree with that, but I partly disagree. I think the thing that
Okay.
happened, particularly after Black Lives Matter, was I think speaking as a straight middle-aged white male. I think what we began to realize, some of us, most of us, was that it wasn't enough just to be generally kind of support. I would certainly class myself as someone that was, supportive,
Yeah.
and yes, more women, yes, more
Yeah.
people from the LGBTQ, yes. You wouldn't have ever argued against it, but we weren't. I wasn't actually attempting to do anything practical about it. I think
Yeah.
what really struck me after, for some reason, the Black Lives Matter movement was it's not enough for those of us in that position just to be generally supportive. I think and empathetic. I think we have to overtly push a bit more.
Yeah.
And what are we doing that we could do just to push the cause a bit more? Because to your point, it's not going as fast as it should, and it's not enough just to be like, yeah, very good, very good.
Yeah.
I think you have to, we have to have a word with things where we can and change it.
Yeah, I guess there's always some truth, isn't it? If you're not part of the solution to something, you find yourself part of the problem, don't you? Yeah. In
Yeah,
the to wrap up, and it's a fairly big question, but I think for young people coming to industry now, our industry is more daunting than ever. Like you say, we don't train people as much as we perhaps should, and we throw them in the deep end of quite big, broad marketing jobs. Now we're telling them they need to get their head around inclusion. If they're not careful, they're also hearing a lot of noise about NFTs and Web 3.0, and also we probably shouldn't overstate it, but marketing does feel like it's quite a tough gig. It's very easy and lovely in some ways, but there's lots of pressure on you. What's your advice to junior marketers, people like setting out in their career? How do they navigate this and become a really good marketer?
Oh, look, I'm pretty optimistic about the state of youth, in the sense that I think that there is such a difference. I mean, you're younger than me, Jerry, but even you would have grown up in an environment of some degree of homophobia.
Yeah,
I think that new generation is not perfect, but I think they're completely different, and I wouldn't worry too much that they would get this bit wrong. I think they just come in naturally preloaded now to be more representative and to think more across the different lines of community that I think many of us ignored in the past. So I think that in that sense, younger people come preloaded with a much, much more healthy approach to diversity.
yeah,
in terms of the marketing part, look, again, I think the advice then remains the same, which is I still think you need to hook up with a decent company. I like a training in marketing of some kind. I think it makes marketers better. I'm in the minority in our discipline, but I believe being trained in marketing makes you better at marketing. That can happen at university, or it can happen at the company that takes you. If you go to a good company, a Unilever or a Google, they're going to put you through that process, and you're going to learn on the
Yeah,
job. And then I think it's really, I see it from the 30s onwards. That if you look at a good CMO, by the time they've reached certainly 50, they're no smarter or more political than others. But what they've been doing throughout their career is learning from the work. So they've
yeah,
almost become their own teacher. And when you look at others that haven't gone as high, it's not that they're any less clever, it's that they didn't spend the previous 30 years learning and putting together so here's what I would do different next. And that's very
yeah,
clear by the time you get to 50. I don't know if when you're 23 and my main excitement about marketing when I was 23 was that there was free bars and
yeah,
lots of shagging. You know what I mean? They were right up there for me. You know what I mean? You could
yeah.
get free beer and maybe get laid on a
You weren't
Friday.
passionate about learning from your mistakes.
Yeah, there wasn't really a lot of, and also you can learn from mistakes.
Yeah,
But 30 years later, I think those that were learning on the job from their experiences became the senior ones.
yeah,
So that's what I'd always say to our young generation coming: get a training, but also become your own trainer and learn from
yeah.
experience. Because I think that's the bit you see when we're old and fat later on.
And you can still enjoy a few beers on the side, so best
Hey,
of
listen,
both.
I had COVID. This is my second beer in like 10 days. I haven't gone this long without a beer in my whole adult life.
Gosh. Well,
Yeah,
we've survived the
tastes
interview
really
despite,
good.
despite that. I hope you're feeling a bit better now. But yeah, thank you so much, Stuart, for your time, Mark. That's been a really interesting conversation. So we'll wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks for watching. Another of the interviews that you'll find in full in the Inclusive Marketing book I've been working on. Please do check out the rest of the series. Get yourself a copy of the book. And please come together as an industry as we continue to try and drive this change.